I had everything a man could ever dream of. Money. Power. Influence. With a single phone call, I could buy a struggling company before breakfast or force a billionaire rival out of business before dinner. In the ruthless world of New York finance, my name carried enough weight to move markets. Reporters called me the elusive billionaire. Investors wanted to be me. Competitors feared me. To the outside world, I was a man who had already won at life. My name is Pharaoh Olivetti. At 39 years old, I had built one of the largest financial empires in America. Private jets waited on my schedule. Luxury penthouses overlooked Manhattan. Every decision I made affected thousands of employees and billions of dollars. People believed I had everything. The truth was, there was only one person whose opinion still mattered to me. My father. He wasn't impressed by expensive cars or billion-dollar acquisitions. He had grown up in a small village in Italy, where a man's reputation was built by honesty, kindness, and the way he treated people who could offer him nothing in return. Whenever I celebrated another business victory, he would smile proudly before reminding me of something I never fully understood. Winning means nothing if it costs you your humanity. I would laugh, pour him another glass of wine, and tell him not to worry. Dad, I know exactly who I am. He'd smile. But I could always see the concern in his eyes. He believed the world I lived in was dangerous. Not because of the money. Because of what the money could slowly turn a man into. He worried that one day I would mistake admiration for love, that I would spend my life surrounded by beautiful faces but never find a woman who truly loved the man behind the fortune. At the time, I thought he was being old-fashioned. I couldn't have been more wrong. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday morning. My phone rang just after sunrise. It was my mother. The moment I heard her voice, my heart sank. Pharaoh. She whispered through tears. You need to come home. I didn't ask questions. I already knew. Within 2 hours, I had cancelled every meeting on my calendar and boarded the first flight to Rome. The longest flight of my life ended far too quickly. When I walked into my father's hospital room, every hope I had been holding on to disappeared. The machines beeped softly beside his bed. The man who had once seemed larger than life looked painfully fragile. His breathing was slow. His hands trembled. His eyes searched the room until they found mine. A faint smile appeared on his face. You came. I pulled a chair beside his bed and gently took his hand. I'm here, Dad. For several moments, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said over a lifetime. I expected him to talk about the family business. To remind me how to protect the company. To leave me one final piece of financial advice. Instead, he asked me for something I never saw coming. Promise me something. Anything. His fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. For 30 days. He paused, struggling to catch his breath. I want you to disappear. I frowned. No money. Another pause. No credit cards. He closed his eyes for a moment before continuing. No bodyguards. And don't use your real name. I stared at him in complete disbelief. He wanted me to walk away from everything I had spent my entire life building. Seeing the confusion on my face, he smiled gently. You've spent your whole life learning how to become a rich man. His voice was barely above a whisper now. But you've never learned what it's like to live without being one. Tears filled my eyes. I don't understand. You will. He squeezed my hand one last time. I don't want people to respect your money. I want someone to love your heart. The room fell silent. For the first time in years. I had no answer. Every business negotiation. Every billion-dollar deal. Every achievement of my life suddenly felt insignificant. My father wasn't worried about my fortune. He was worried about me. I promise, I whispered. I'll do it. A peaceful smile spread across his face. Thank you, son. A few seconds later, his grip loosened. The heart monitor let out one long, endless tone. And just like that, the strongest man I had ever known was gone. I sat beside him long after the doctors entered the room. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply held his hand, realizing that despite all the money I possessed, there wasn't a single thing in the world I could buy to bring him back. The day after the funeral, I kept my promise. I returned to New York, walked into my penthouse, and stood in front of a closet filled with custom-tailored Italian suits. I ignored every one of them. Instead, I chose an old jacket, faded jeans, and a pair of worn sneakers. For the first time in decades, I looked ordinary. Before leaving, I handed my driver's license to my chauffeur. If anyone asks, I said, tell them Mr. Olivetti is traveling overseas. He looked completely confused. Sir, are you certain? I smiled faintly. No. But a promise is a promise. A few hours later, I stepped onto the crowded streets of Manhattan carrying nothing but a small backpack. Inside my pocket were just 50 cents. And a small pack of peanuts. Pharaoh Olivetti no longer existed. For the next 30 days, my name was Claude Reno. And I was about to discover just how little I understood about the real world. The moment I stepped out of the airport, I realized my father had been right about one thing. The world treated ordinary people very differently. For years, I had arrived in Manhattan surrounded by black SUVs, security teams, and assistants who planned every minute of my day. Now, I stood on the sidewalk carrying a cheap backpack while thousands of strangers walked past me without giving me a second glance. No one recognized me. No one cared. It was the first time in my adult life that I felt completely invisible. At first, I enjoyed it. There were no board meetings. No reporters. No investors asking for favors. Just endless streets filled with people trying to survive another day. But by evening, the excitement had faded. Reality had arrived. My stomach was empty. My feet hurt. And I had nowhere to sleep. I reached into my pocket and counted my money for what felt like the 100th time. 50 cents. That was all I had. Back when I was Pharaoh Olivetti, I had spent more than that tipping a valet without thinking twice. Now, every coin suddenly mattered. I wandered through Manhattan for hours, watching people rush home from work while the lights from expensive restaurants spilled onto the sidewalks. The smell of fresh pizza drifted through the air. Coffee shops were still full. People laughed over dinner as if life were perfectly normal. I lowered my eyes and kept walking. For the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to be hungry without knowing where the next meal would come from. Around midnight, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I spotted an empty bench in a quiet park and sat down. It's only one night, I whispered to myself. I've slept on private yachts. Surely I can survive one night on a bench. I stretched out and closed my eyes. Less than 20 minutes later, a loud bang jolted me awake. 3 men stood over me. One kicked the side of the bench. Move. Another pointed toward the street. This spot isn't yours. I slowly stood up. I don't want any trouble. The tallest man laughed. Then leave. I walked away without saying another word. As I crossed the empty street, I couldn't stop thinking about how different life looked from the ground. Money had protected me from problems I never even knew existed. I wandered aimlessly until flashing police lights suddenly lit up the alley beside me. An elderly shop owner rushed outside. "Officer," he shouted. "That's him. I saw someone sneaking around behind my building." Before I had time to explain, 2 officers approached me. "Sir, keep your hands where we can see them. I wasn't trying to steal anything." "Then you won't mind answering a few questions." 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of a police cruiser. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just 48 hours earlier, I had been negotiating a $1 billion acquisition. Now I was being questioned over a burglary I hadn't committed. Inside the station, an officer searched my backpack. He looked disappointed. That's it? He held up the peanuts. No wallet? No phone? No ID? I simply shook my head. Another officer chuckled. Tough week? You could say that. After taking my fingerprints, they placed me inside a holding cell. The metal bench was freezing. The silence was unbearable. For the first time in years, there were no emails waiting for me. No stock prices to monitor. No executives asking for decisions. Just me. And my thoughts. Nearly an hour later, a police officer stopped outside my cell. You get one phone call. He slid the receiver through the bars. I stared at it for several seconds. One call. That was all it would take. One phone call. And my old life would come rushing back. I could have my attorney send a limousine. My security team could be here within minutes. I could sleep in my penthouse before sunrise. Instead, I called Lawrence. He answered immediately. Pharaoh, he shouted. Where have you been? The board is panicking. Our competitors have started buying shares. They're telling investors you've disappeared. If this continues, they'll try to force a takeover. I closed my eyes. Every instinct told me to end my father's challenge right then and there. But another voice, my father's voice, echoed inside my head. Learn what life feels like without your money. I took a slow breath. Handle it. There was silence. What? Whatever it takes. They're attacking us from every direction. I know. We may have to sell $20 million worth of shares. Then sell them. Another long silence. Finally, Lawrence spoke quietly. Pharaoh, are you sure you're thinking clearly? I looked around the tiny jail cell. For the first time in years. I honestly didn't know. But I did know one thing. I made my father a promise. And I'm going to keep it. The next morning, the police released me after confirming there wasn't enough evidence to charge me. One of the officers handed me my backpack. Looks like you were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. I thanked him and stepped back onto the sidewalk. The morning air was cold. I hadn't eaten since the flight from Rome. Every step felt heavier than the last. Then the smell of grilled onions caught my attention. A small hot dog cart stood on the corner. An older man was wiping down the counter before opening for the morning. I walked over, hoping 50 cents might buy me something. It didn't. The vendor smiled apologetically. Sorry, son. Prices went up years ago. I nodded and turned to leave. Hold on. I stopped. He reached for a fresh hot dog, added mustard, onions, and ketchup, then wrapped it in paper before handing it to me. Here. I stared at him. I can't pay for this. I know. Then why are you giving it to me? The old man shrugged. Because someone once did the same for me when I had nothing. I looked down at the warm meal in my hands. No expensive dinner. No five-star restaurant. Had ever meant this much. I offered him every coin I had. He accepted only one. Then he pushed the remaining coins back into my hand. Keep them. You never know when your last few cents might save your life. I smiled for the first time in days. Thank you. As I walked away, I realized something my father had understood all along. Real generosity isn't measured by how much you give. It's measured by how much you have, and still choose to share. I had no idea that only a few minutes later, one unexpected encounter was about to change the course of my entire life. I had just finished the last bite of my hot dog when I stepped off the curb without looking. A loud horn blasted through the morning traffic. Watch out. I froze. A delivery truck screeched to a stop just inches from me. The driver jumped out immediately. Are you crazy? He shouted, breathing heavily. I almost killed you. I'm sorry, I said, still shaken. I wasn't paying attention. He looked at my worn clothes, then at the exhausted expression on my face. You okay? I forced a smile. I've had better weeks. For a moment, he simply studied me. Then his expression softened. My name's Fred. Claude. He extended his hand, and I shook it. You look like a decent guy who's fallen on hard times. I guess that's one way to put it. Fred leaned against his truck. You looking for work? I'll take anything. He scratched his chin for a moment. One of my regular customers owns a real estate company. He's been complaining for weeks that he can't find a reliable chauffeur. I've never driven professionally. Can you drive? Of course. He grinned. That's good enough for Curtis. I couldn't believe my luck. Within an hour, Fred drove me to a large office building in Midtown Manhattan. Before leaving, he handed me a business card. If he gives you a hard time, call me. I appreciate this. No, Fred replied with a smile. Just help somebody else when you get back on your feet. Those words stayed with me long after he drove away. Curtis Reynolds turned out to be exactly the kind of man I used to negotiate against. Loud. Arrogant. Impatient. He barely looked up from his phone during our interview. You have a clean driving record? Yes. You drink? No. You show up late? Never. He tossed a set of car keys across the desk. $600 a week. When do I start? He stood up. 5 minutes ago. That was the entire interview. 24 hours earlier, I had been negotiating billion-dollar mergers. Now I was opening limousine doors for a man who never once bothered to learn my last name. Strangely, I didn't hate it. For the first time in years, nobody expected me to save a company. All I had to do was show up on time and do my job. Curtis's office was every bit as chaotic as its owner. Employees rushed through the hallways carrying files. Phones rang nonstop. Arguments broke out over contracts. Everyone looked exhausted. Everyone. Except one woman. The first time I saw Diane Mancini, she was helping an elderly couple understand the paperwork for their first home. She wasn't trying to sell them something they couldn't afford. She was trying to protect them. She patiently explained every document, answered every question, and even convinced them not to buy a property that wasn't right for them. Most agents chased commissions. She chased trust. When the couple finally left, smiling from ear to ear, she noticed me standing nearby. You must be the new driver. I guess the news travels fast. She laughed. Nothing stays secret in this office. I'm Claude. Diane. She offered her hand. The moment our hands touched, something felt different. Not dramatic. Not magical. Just comfortable. It was a feeling I couldn't explain. Over the next few weeks, I drove Curtis everywhere. The more time I spent around the office, the more I noticed Diane. She always arrived before everyone else. She stayed later than everyone else. She treated the receptionist with the same respect she showed millionaire clients. One afternoon, I found her eating lunch alone in the break room. Mind if I join you? She smiled. Only if you don't mind a very boring turkey sandwich. I've eaten peanuts for dinner. She laughed. Then I guess my sandwich wins. It was the first real conversation we'd had. She told me she had lost her husband several years earlier while he was serving overseas. After his death, medical bills and debt had forced her to sell their home. Now she was living with her parents while trying to rebuild her life from scratch. She said it without asking for sympathy. Just facts. I admired that. When she asked about my past, I lied. Not completely. Just enough. I've made a few mistakes. She nodded. haven't we all? For the first time since my father died. Talking to someone actually made the weight on my shoulders feel lighter. The longer I worked there, the more obvious one thing became. Curtis didn't deserve employees like Diane. He treated everyone as if they were disposable. Nothing was ever good enough. One afternoon, everything finally boiled over. A major client canceled a contract. Curtis stormed into the office screaming. He blamed everyone except himself. Then his eyes landed on Diane. "This is your fault." She remained calm. "It wasn't my client." "I don't care." He slammed a file onto her desk. "If you spent less time playing therapist and more time selling houses, maybe this company wouldn't be bleeding money." The entire office fell silent. Diane lowered her eyes but said nothing. I couldn't. I stepped forward. "She didn't do anything wrong." Curtis slowly turned toward me. "Did I ask for your opinion?" "No." "Then remember something. You're just the driver." I looked him straight in the eye. "And you're the reason good people keep leaving this company." The office became so quiet that you could hear the air conditioner humming. Curtis's face turned bright red. "You're fired." I smiled. "You can't fire someone who quits first." I placed the car keys on his desk. "I'll save you the trouble." As I turned toward the door, I heard another voice behind me. "Wait." It was Diane. She picked up her purse. Looked directly at Curtis. Then calmly removed her company badge. "I quit too." Neither of us knew what came next. We only knew one thing. Sometimes, walking away from the wrong place is the first step toward finding the right one. For the next 2 days, neither of us had a job. We met at a small neighborhood diner, the kind of place where the waitress knew every customer by name. The coffee was cheap, the booze were old, and somehow, it felt more peaceful than any 5-star restaurant I had ever visited. Diane stirred her coffee and smiled. "So, we're officially unemployed." I laughed. "I've been called worse." She looked at me for a moment before speaking. "You don't seem worried." "I am. But worrying has never solved a problem." She nodded slowly. "Fair point." For a few seconds, we sat in silence. Then an idea crossed my mind. What if we started our own agency? She blinked. "Our own? Why not?" She laughed. "Claude, we don't even have enough money to pay for breakfast tomorrow." "Maybe not. But we know how clients should be treated." She studied my face, trying to figure out whether I was serious. "You really believe we could do it?" "I do." She looked out the window, then back at me. "Finally." She smiled. "You know what? Why the hell not?" That single sentence changed both of our lives. Diane invested every dollar she had saved. I invested everything I had learned during years of building businesses, without ever revealing where that knowledge came from. Together, we rented the smallest office we could find. The paint was peeling. The furniture was secondhand. The sign outside looked as if it had been hanging there since the 1980s. But to us, it looked like the beginning of something extraordinary. We called it Mancini and Reno Realty. A few days later, 3 agents from Curtis's office walked through our front door. "We heard you two started your own company. We're tired of working for Curtis. You hiring?" Diane looked at me. I smiled. "Only if you're willing to build something instead of just collecting a paycheck." They all accepted. The office suddenly felt alive. The first month wasn't easy. Some days, the phone never rang. Other days, clients walked in only to leave without signing a single contract. There were moments when we questioned everything. But Diane never gave up. Neither did I. Then one satisfied client recommended us to another. That client referred 2 more. Slowly, our reputation began to grow. Within a few months, we weren't the biggest agency in Manhattan. But we had become one of the most trusted. People came to us because they knew we cared more about families than commissions. One evening, after closing our biggest deal yet, everyone gathered in the office with cheap takeout and a bottle of whiskey. We laughed until midnight. When the others finally left, Diane and I stayed behind to clean up. She looked around the office and smiled. Can you believe this? A few months ago, we didn't even know what tomorrow would look like. I smiled. Now look at us. She stepped closer. You know, I've been wanting to tell you something. My heart started beating faster. She looked directly into my eyes. When I first met you, I thought you were just another guy looking for a paycheck. She laughed softly. I've never been so wrong. You've shown me more kindness than anyone I've ever known. She reached for my hand. I think. No. I know. I've fallen in love with you, Claude. For a moment. The world disappeared. Every business victory I had ever celebrated suddenly felt meaningless compared to hearing those words. I love you too, I whispered. And for the first time since my father's death, I truly understood what he had been trying to teach me. But happiness has a way of attracting trouble. While my new life was beginning, my old one was falling apart. Lawrence called late one evening. Our competitors have forced an emergency court hearing. If you don't appear on Monday, they'll try to take control of Olivetti Enterprises. I remained silent. Only 3 days remained before my promise to my father would end. I can't come back yet. There has to be another way, Lawrence said. After hours of preparation, Lawrence appeared in court with every legal document needed to prove my authority over the company. Our competitors challenged everything they could, hoping to force a default judgment. But the paperwork held. The judge dismissed their attempt. For now, the company was safe. I had kept both my promise and my father's legacy. Unfortunately, my greatest battle wasn't in a courtroom. It was waiting for me back at the office. While organizing paperwork, Diane accidentally found documents connected to Olivetti Enterprises. She looked confused, then suspicious. Before I could explain, she searched online. A photograph appeared on her screen. My photograph. She slowly looked up at me. Who are you? I tried to speak. Please. Let me explain. Her eyes filled with tears. Your name isn't Claude. I lowered my head. No. You lied to me. I never lied about how I felt. But you lied about everything else. She stepped backward. I trusted you. Diane. Don't. I don't even know who you are anymore. She walked away before I could say another word. Watching her leave hurt far more than losing billions ever could. 30 days had finally passed. I returned to my mansion. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The expensive artwork. The marble floors. The luxury cars. Yet somehow, it all felt empty. My mother found me sitting alone in my father's library. You kept your promise. I did. But it cost me the woman I love. She smiled gently. Your father once chased me across 3 cities before I agreed to marry him. I couldn't help laughing. She squeezed my shoulder. I've never known an Olivetti to quit. So stop feeling sorry for yourself. Go find her. I found Diane at the airport. A single suitcase rested beside her. She looked surprised to see me. I was wondering if you'd come. I almost didn't. She smiled sadly. I'm leaving New York. I know. She looked away. Maybe someday. I'll visit you. I stepped closer. Don't visit me. Come with me. She searched my face. After everything? I should have trusted you from the beginning. I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, You'd fall in love with my money instead of me. She remained silent for several long seconds. Then she quietly reached for my hand. I fell in love with the man who shared cheap coffee with me. Not the man whose face was on magazine covers. Together, we boarded the plane. Only after stepping inside did she stop walking. Flight attendants stood in 2 perfect rows. "Welcome back, Mr. Olivetti." She slowly turned toward me. Her eyes widened as she looked around the luxurious cabin. "So," she whispered, "you really are Pharaoh Olivetti?" I nodded. "I am." She smiled through her tears. "You know, you were a much better driver." I laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." She wrapped her arms around me. I held her close. Then I quietly whispered the words my father had spent a lifetime trying to teach me. I built my fortune with money. But I found my life with 50 cents. And you? As the jet lifted into the clouds, I looked out the window and smiled. For the first time in my life, victory no longer belonged to my business. It belonged to my heart. If this story touched your heart, take a second to let us know in the comments. Tell us honestly, do you think Diane would have fallen in love with Pharaoh if she had known he was a billionaire from the very beginning? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves emotional romance stories, and subscribe for more unforgettable billionaire love stories every week. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.